It was a normal Monday morning in New York City. The sky was cloudy, and the streets were filled with people going to work. Inside one of the tallest buildings in the city, something unusual was happening. Edward Langston, one of the richest men in America, was walking into his own company without warning anyone. He didn't smile. He didn't talk much. He was serious and always expected everyone around him to be perfect. His workers often felt nervous when he was around, he said. He was cold, like a machine that only cared about money. Edward believed in hard work, discipline, and success. That's what had made him a billionaire. He built his company from nothing and now owned one of the most powerful tech empires in the world. He wore expensive suits, had a driver waiting for him every day, and lived in a luxury apartment high above the city. People respected him, but they were also afraid of him. On this day, something small but strange happened. The private elevator that usually took Edward straight to the top floor was not working. It had a technical issue, and the only elevator available was the regular one used by the staff. Edward sighed. He hated delays. But instead of waiting longer, he stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to go up. As the doors were about too close, someone called out, "Wait, please." Still, the elevator stopped just in time for a young woman in a janitor's uniform to step in. She looked around 20 years old, with smooth brown skin, short curly hair, tied back under a cap, and tired but bright eyes. She carried a mop in one hand and a small lunch bag in the other. Her oversized uniform looked like it belonged to someone else. But she stood straight, said good morning, and gave Edward a small, polite smile. Edward didn't respond. Simply looked straight ahead, pretending she wasn't there. The ride felt long, even though it was only a few floors. After a moment of silence, the girl spoke again. "Why does no one smile in this building?" she asked softly. Edward turned his head slightly, surprised by the question. No one ever talked to him this way, especially not a janitor. He raised his eyebrows and said coldly, "We're here to work, not to make friends." The girl looked down, a little embarrassed, but didn't say anything else. The elevator reached her floor, and she stepped out quietly. Edward continued up to the top, but something about the moment stayed with him. He tried to forget it, but the simple question echoed in his mind. Why does no one smile in this building? Later that day, Edward had several meetings. He discussed profit numbers, upcoming product launches, and issues with his overseas branch. His assistant brought him his usual lunch grilled chicken, no salt, no sauce, and mineral water. Everything was in order just the way he liked it. But when he passed by the basement stairs during his evening check of the security systems, something caught his attention. He heard humming, soft melody, coming from the corner of the staff break room. Curious and slightly annoyed, he walked closer. There she was, again the same girl from the elevator. She sat on a small plastic chair, barefoot now, with her boots placed neatly beside her. She was humming a gentle song, one he hadn't heard in years, an old gospel song. She was eating a simple sandwich, just bread and what looked like peanut butter, and sipping water from a paper cup. Her face looked calm, peaceful. It was a kind of peace Edward hadn't felt in a long time. There was no phone in her hand, no complaints on her lips, no sign of hurry. She was just there, sitting quietly after a long day's work. Edward wanted to walk away, but he stood still. For a moment, the song reminded him of someone. A woman who used to sing the same tune many years ago. It took him a few seconds to remember. His childhood nanny, Miss Josephine, who took care of him after his mother passed away when he was just 7. Miss Josephine used to hum that exact song. While she cooked or cleaned or sat beside his bed when he couldn't sleep, she was kind, soft-spoken, and warm. She was the last person in his life who gave him true love before he closed his heart and chose business over feelings. Edward shook his head, forcing the memory away. He walked back to his office. That night, as he sat in his glass-covered penthouse, looking out at the bright city, he poured himself a glass of water and opened his laptop. He wanted to focus on a new merger deal, but instead, he found himself typing a strange search in the company system, New janitorial hires. Female. Age around 20. A few names popped up. One of them was Amina Dawson, hired 2 weeks ago. Night shift. Part-time. He clicked on her profile. No photo but her employment. Form said she lived in the Bronx, had 3 younger siblings, and was working 2 jobs. No criminal record. Emergency contact. None. He leaned back in his chair. Edward wasn't sure why he was even looking. Maybe it was the song. Maybe it was the way she looked at him in the elevator, not with fear or awe, but with simple curiosity. Or maybe it was her question. Why does no one smile in this building? No one had ever asked him that. Everyone just followed his rules. No one ever questioned the mood of his empire. He finished his water and closed the laptop. Before going to bed, he looked at an old photo on his side table. A picture of him, his ex-wife, and his daughter back when they were still together. The photo was 10 years old. Dust had collected on the edges of the frame. Hadn't spoken to his daughter in years. He didn't even know if she still lived in the country as he turned off the lights. One thought stayed in his mind, not about money, not about the next big deal, but about the quiet girl who worked in his building and dared to ask, why doesn't anyone smile? And deep down, for the first time in a long while, Edward Langston didn't feel powerful. He felt something else. He felt human. The next morning, Edward arrived at the office earlier than usual. He didn't tell anyone why. As always, his assistant greeted him. His coffee was waiting on his desk, and the day was filled with meetings. But this time, Edward found himself distracted. He kept thinking about the janitor, girl Amina. He remembered her soft voice, the old gospel song she hummed, and the peace on her face. He couldn't explain it, but something about her bothered him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him look at himself throughout the day. He passed by the basement twice, pretending to check building maintenance. Both times he looked for her, but she wasn't there. He didn't even know her schedule. It was strange. He was the CEO, yet he suddenly felt like a man searching for a quiet voice in a crowd. That night, after everyone had gone home, Edward stayed late in his office. The building was quiet now. He walked around alone without his usual security team. As he passed the lower hallway near the storage rooms, he heard that soft humming again, the same gospel tune. His feet followed the sound without thinking. There. Amina was in the stairwell, wiping the railing and humming gently to herself. She didn't see him at first. She wore the same oversized uniform, but her posture was graceful. Her body moved with rhythm like the cleaning was part of a dance she had practiced for years. Edward stepped forward. That song, ... where did you learn it? Mina turned, surprised to see him. She quickly stood straight and looked nervous. Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anyone. Edward raised his hand gently. You're not disturbing anyone. I'm just curious. That song, someone used to sing it when I was young. She smiled lightly. It's a church song. My grandmother sang it all the time. She raised me. When I feel tired, it helps me breathe. Edward nodded slowly. You sing it like you mean it. Amina shrugged. I do. There was a long silence. Edward wasn't used to talking like this, especially not with someone on the janitor team. He was usually in meetings with billionaires, lawyers, or scientists. But Amina's honesty made it hard for him to act like the cold CEO he had always been. What's your name? He finally asked. Amina Dawson. And you're working the night shift here? He asked, even though he already knew. Yes. Sir, I started 2 weeks ago. It's my second job. Edward tilted his head. Second job? What's the first? I work at a diner during the day. It's not much, but it helps pay the bills. Bills for who? He asked. She hesitated for a moment and said, for my siblings. I have 3. I'm the oldest. Our parents passed away 3 years ago, so it's just me now. Edward's chest tightened. Wasn't sure why, but her words felt heavy. You go to school? He asked. I did. I got into college with a scholarship, architecture, but I had to leave. Couldn't manage the costs. Rent, food, bills, and all that. Edward looked at her with surprise. Architecture.
Oh.
You want to be an architect? Mina smiled softly, as if the word itself gave her hope. Yes, I love buildings. I used to sit outside and draw houses as a kid. My dream is to design homes for people like me, people who've lost their way but still need shelter. For a moment, Edward didn't know what to say. He had built smart homes, office towers, and tech campuses. But never had he heard someone speak of architecture with so much heart. You're very calm, he finally said. Even after everything you've been through. Amina looked at him, her eyes kind but steady. Because I don't see myself as small. Life has been hard. Yes. But I still have my mind, my hands, and my dreams. That's something no one can take. Edward froze. I don't see myself as small. That sentence struck him. He'd spent years stepping over people to reach the top. In his world, power came from money, position, and silence. But here was a young woman with nothing, no fancy title, no big office, no wealth, and yet she stood tall. He cleared his throat. You shouldn't be wasting your life cleaning staircases. Amina looked at him without flinching. It's not wasting if it helps someone else get ahead. My little brother wants to be a doctor. My sister wants to be a teacher. If I clean today so they can study tomorrow, it's worth it. Edward nodded slowly and stepped back. Carry on, Miss Dawson. Good night, sir, she said softly. He turned and walked away, but her words kept echoing in his mind. Not just her words, but the strength behind them. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking out at the city. The lights below looked like stars trapped in buildings. He thought about his own journey. He had grown up poor too. His father had died young. His mother tried to keep the family together, but she passed away when he was in high school. He had worked odd jobs, borrowed money, lived on coffee and cold rice, and fought his way into Harvard. After that, he became obsessed with building a life where he would never feel weak again. But in chasing that strength, he had left everything behind. His wife, tired of his workaholic ways, had divorced him. His daughter stopped calling after. Her 16th birthday? He hadn't spoken to her since she was 19. She was 27 now. He thought he was strong. But what if he was just alone? He opened his laptop again and clicked on Amina's profile. There was a line at the bottom that caught his attention. Emergency contact. None. A girl with no one to call if something went wrong. Yet she still smiled, still hummed, still held on to her dream. Edward suddenly stood up and walked over to his bookshelf. He pulled out a dusty sketchbook from his early college years. Back when he still drew things by hand. Back when he still dreamed like Amina did. He flipped through the pages and stopped at a drawing of a shelter for single mothers, surrounded by gardens and warm lights. He had designed it for a class once, but never built it. He smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was time to listen. Maybe it was time to remember who he used to be, before the cold suits, before the meetings, before the silence, and maybe, just maybe, that janitor girl had done something no one else had in years. She had reached his heart. It was a Friday night, and the office was almost empty. Most of the employees had left early to enjoy the weekend. Only a few people remained, mostly the night cleaning staff and a couple of security guards. Edward Langston, the billionaire CEO, was still in his office. But this time, he wasn't working on a big deal or looking at charts. Instead, he kept checking the security camera screen, watching the basement hallway. He wasn't sure why he was doing it. Maybe curiosity.
Maybe
something deeper. After a while, he saw her again, Amina Dawson, the janitor girl who had changed something in him without even trying. She was moving between rooms, mopping floors, wiping glass, doing her job without complaint. Edward closed his laptop and quietly made his way down the stairs. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't bring his assistant or his driver. He just wanted to see her again. Let's talk. To understand why she had left such a strong impression on him when he reached the basement. He saw her sitting on the floor in a corner room. The lights were dim. She had finished cleaning and was now holding some large blueprints, actually. They were old, folded at the edges, probably picked up from a recycling bin. She was drawing on them carefully, using a pencil and ruler. Edward stood at the door for a moment, watching her. She was focused, her eyes following every line she made. Her face looked calm, like she was in her own world. He gently knocked on the open door. Amina looked up, surprised. "Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry, sir. I'll get back to work." Edward raised his hand. "No need. I'm not here to check your work. I just saw you drawing." She looked down at the papers and smiled shyly. "Oh, it's nothing. Just something I do to stay connected to my dream." He stepped into the room. "May I see?" Amina hesitated for a second, then nodded. She handed him one of the sheets. Edward unfolded it. It was a design for a small housing complex. Simple, but thoughtful. Each building had green space, play areas, and ramps for wheelchairs. It wasn't just a structure, it was a home. "This is impressive," he said, truly meaning it. "Thank you," Amina replied quietly. "I know it's not perfect. I'd studied professionally in a while, but I try to keep practicing." Edward sat down on a nearby chair. "Tell me more. What is this place?" "It's my dream project," she said, eyes lighting up. "Affordable homes for women and children who have nowhere to go. I want to build safe places, especially for mothers escaping difficult situations. Each apartment has sunlight, safety, and silence. A place to breathe." Dort looked at her for a long moment. "Why this? Why not fancy skyscrapers or modern museums like most architecture students?" Mina paused, then answered softly, "Because people need homes more than they need towers. I grew up in a shelter for some time. It wasn't safe. It was noisy, cold, and scary at night. I promised myself that one day I would design something better. I want every child to sleep feeling safe, not just rich children. All children." Edward's chest tightened again. The way she spoke, so honest, so directed, reminded him of a time when he had dreams, not just goals. When he wanted to make a difference, not just make money. He cleared his throat. "You know, I once designed something similar. Back in college." "Really?" Amina's eyes lit up. He nodded. "But I never built it. I got too busy chasing success." Amina smiled warmly. "It's never too late." Edward looked at her, surprised by her words. "You think so?" She nodded. "I have to believe that, or else I wouldn't keep going." He folded the papers gently and handed them back. "You have a strong mind, Amina. Not many people your age have this kind of clarity." "Sometimes hard times make us see things clearly," she replied with a calm tone. Then, out of nowhere, Edward asked something personal. "Do you ever feel angry? I mean, at life? At how unfair things have been?" Mina looked at him surprised. No one had ever asked her that before. Sometimes she admitted, but not for long. "Anger takes too much energy. I need my energy to survive, to take care of my siblings, to keep dreaming." Edward nodded slowly. Then Amina looked at him and asked a question that stopped him cold. "Don't you have a family too?" He looked at her, stunned. No one had asked him that in years. He wasn't expecting it. Her voice wasn't rude or challenging. It was gentle, genuine, like someone who truly wanted to know. He opened his mouth but didn't speak. His throat felt dry. His mind raced. After a long pause, he said quietly, "I did. A wife, a daughter. But I haven't seen them in a long time." "Why not?" she asked softly. Edward looked away. "Work, ambition. I thought if I could become successful, everything else would follow. But I was wrong." Mina didn't say anything. She just looked at him with kind eyes. "Success can be lonely," she said finally, "but love never is." Those words hit him harder than any business failure ever had. He stood up slowly. "You've given me a lot to think about," Amina nodded. "Sometimes the heart just needs someone to listen." Edward walked out of the room, but he didn't feel the same anymore. Something had shifted inside him. A young girl with nothing had reminded him of everything he had lost. When he got back to his office, he didn't turn on his laptop. He didn't check his emails. He just sat by the window and looked at the stars above the city. He thought about his daughter, her smile, her birthday parties, the time she asked him to come to her school play and he didn't show up. He thought about his wife, the way she used to hold his hand when he was tired, the way her voice changed when she realized he cared more about deals than dinners. And he thought about Amina, a girl who cleaned floors but dreamed of changing the sea world. That night, for the first time in years, Edward picked up his phone and looked for a number. He hadn't dialed in a long time. His daughter's. His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't press call. Not yet, but for the first time. He wanted to. Edward Langston woke up the next morning feeling different. Couldn't explain it, but something inside him had changed. The conversations with Amina kept playing in his mind, her quiet strength, her calm voice, and especially her words. "Don't you have a family too?" He had spent years building an empire, leading teams, speaking to investors, and expanding his business across the globe. But in all that time, he had lost the people who once mattered most. His daughter hadn't called in years. His ex-wife had given up trying. For so long, he believed that success was enough, that having money, fame, and power could replace the feeling of being loved. But now, simple janitor had reminded him of something real. He sat in his office that morning, staring at the company. Mission statement on the wall. Talked about innovation, technology, and global impact. But something was missing. Humanity. Heart. The very thing Amina had shown him. Later that day, he called an emergency meeting with his executive team. Everyone rushed in, confused. Some thought a major deal had fallen through. Others assumed the company was about to make a big announcement. But Edward stood calmly at the front of the room and said, "We're starting something new." The room went silent. He continued, "We're launching an internal program focused on supporting young talent from low-income communities, especially those who work right here in our building. They clean our floors, fix our pipes, and serve our meals. We walk past them every day without saying a word. That stops now." A few of the board members shifted in their seats. One of them, Mr. Callahan, raised his hand. "With all due respect, sir, this feels off track. Our brand is tech, not charity." Edward looked directly at him. "It's not charity, it's leadership." Another executive spoke up. "Do you mean we'll offer scholarships or mentorships?" "Yes," Edward replied. "Training, education, housing support, whatever they need to stand on their own feet and chase real dreams." A woman from HR looked puzzled. "And who will lead this new project?" Edward didn't hesitate. "I will." There was silence again. No one had seen this side of him before. Then Edward added, "We'll call it the Amina Initiative." Heads turned. A few people whispered to one another. "The idea came from a conversation I had recently," he explained. "And it reminded me why I started this company in the first place. To build something meaningful. Something lasting." Though a few board members looked unsure, no one dared to argue. Not because they were afraid, but because they saw something different in Edward's eyes. Something they hadn't seen in years. Later that afternoon, Edward asked his assistant to find Amina and invite her for lunch in the executive lounge. She was hesitant at first. She thought she had done something wrong, but the assistant assured her it was a kind invitation. Amina showed up in clean clothes, simple jeans, and a white blouse. She looked unsure, a little nervous, but she walked with quiet confidence. Edward stood as she entered. "Amina, thank you for coming." She gave a soft smile. "You're welcome, sir. I hope everything's okay." "It's more than okay," Edward said, offering her a seat. "I wanted to speak with you properly, not as a CEO to an employee, but as one person to another." Amina sat down slowly. "All right," looked at her with full sincerity. "You've reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, how important it is to care about people, not just profits." She listened quietly. "I want to help you finish school," he said. "A full scholarship. All your expenses paid. I also want to offer you an internship here with our architectural design team. You'll work with some of the best minds in the field." Amina's eyes widened. She couldn't speak at first. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Are you serious?" she asked softly. Edward nodded. "Completely." She bit her lip, her voice a whisper. "Could I ask one thing?" "Of course, my little sister. She's only 7. If I'm going to school and working part-time here, I'll need help with childcare. Is there any way the company can?" Help with that too? Edward smiled. Yes, I'll arrange a spot for her in our partner daycare center, close to the office. You'll be able to visit her during breaks. Amina's eyes filled with tears. She quickly wiped them away. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Edward replied. Just keep dreaming. And when the time comes, help someone else do the same. She nodded, still emotional. Before she left, she looked at him and said something simple but powerful. You know, you look lighter today, happier. Edward chuckled. Maybe I am. That evening, Edward stood in front of his office window once again, but this time the view felt different. The city below didn't look like a machine. It looked like a place filled with stories, struggles, and quiet heroes like Amina. He finally picked up his phone and scrolled to the contact he had been avoiding for years. Claire daughter. His finger hovered over the call button. His heart beat fast. He pressed it. The line rang once, twice, then. Hello, a woman's voice. Edward froze. Claire. There was a long silence. Dad, no, she finally said, her voice a mix of shock and emotion. Yeah. It's me, Edward said, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say, but I'm sorry for everything. Another pause. Then she said, I didn't expect this. Not today. Not after all these years. I didn't expect it either. Edward admitted. But someone reminded me what matters. What? I'd really like to see you again. If that's okay? Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think I'd like that too. They agreed to meet for coffee on Sunday. As Edward ended the call, he felt something shift in his chest, kind of peace he hadn't known in years, not from winning, not from deals, but from connection. And all of it had started because a young girl in a janitor uniform had asked him a simple, human question. Don't you have a family too? The office looked different now, not because of new paint or furniture, but because something in the air had changed. It had been a few months since Edward Langston, the Billionaire CEO, had launched the Amina initiative, and people in the company were starting to feel something they hadn't felt before: hope. Amina was no longer just a janitor. She now walked the halls as an intern in the architecture department. She wore a badge, carried a sketchbook, and spoke with senior designers who treated her with respect. She still worked hard, maybe even harder, but now she walked with her head a little higher, and her eyes full of dreams. And Edward? He was changing too. He still wore his expensive suits and still made major business decisions, but people noticed he smiled more. He greeted staff by name, took time to ask the cafeteria worker how her son was doing, or the receptionist if she needed help carrying boxes. He was still the CEO, but now he was also something more. One day, the company held a big annual event and award ceremony to recognize talent and innovation. Normally, it was a night of numbers, speeches, and polished presentations. But this year, Edward asked if they could include one special guest speaker. The lights dimmed, and the room filled with employees, investors, and even reporters. Edward walked onto the stage and stood behind the microphone. He looked around the grand room and took a deep breath. Tonight, he said, we celebrate our growth, our success, and the future we're building. But I want to tell you a story first. The room became quiet. A few months ago, I met someone who reminded me why I started this company. Not a board member, not an investor, not a tech genius, a janitor. People murmured. She asked me a question that stopped me cold. She said, don't you have a family too? That simple question made me think deeper than I ever had before. It reminded me that behind every suit, every desk, every role there is a person. With struggles, with a heart. Then he turned toward the side of the stage and said, Amina Dawson, would you join me up here? Amina walked slowly onto the stage. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, but her posture was strong, and her presence filled the room. Crowd clapped politely at first, but then louder when Edward handed her the microphone and stepped aside. Amina looked nervous at first, but she took a deep breath and began. Hello, my name is Amina Dawson. A few months ago, I was working the night shift here as part of the janitorial staff. I never thought I'd be standing on this stage. Not in my wildest dreams. I used to sweep these floors and wonder if anyone even knew my name. But one day I got stuck in the elevator with Mr. Langston. The audience chuckled softly. I asked him why no one smiled in the building. I didn't mean it to be rude. I just really wanted to know. A few days later, he asked me about my life, and I told him I wanted to be an architect. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. She paused, her voice steady. He listened. He helped. He believed in me before I could even believe in myself again. Amina looked directly at Edward, then at the crowd. I want to say this. There are people around us every day who go unseen. Not because they're not important, but because we forget to look. We forget to ask. But when we take time to see them, to hear them, we discover stories that can change lives. Mine changed because someone listened. The room stood in silence for a moment, deeply moved. Then applause began. Not just polite clapping, but real, warm, powerful applause. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. Edward stepped back up and gave Amina a gentle nod. That evening, after the event, people gathered to congratulate her. Architects offered to mentor her. Journalists asked for interviews. Designers shared ideas with her. And quietly, in a corner of the room, Edward stood with someone he hadn't seen in nearly a decade, his daughter, Claire. They had met for coffee weeks ago, just as planned. The first meeting was quiet, a little awkward, but filled with emotion. Since then, they had started calling each other again. He even met her husband and her newborn baby boy, his grandson. That night, Claire hugged her father tightly. "She changed you," she said, smiling, "and I'm really glad she did." Edward nodded, holding back tears. "So am I." The following week, a new project was announced. Edward and Amina would work together on building her dream. A housing complex for single mothers and children who needed a second chance. It would be designed by Amina, supported by the company's resources, and built with love and care. The blueprint she once sketched in silence was now turning into real walls. Real doors, real homes. Months later, at the groundbreaking ceremony, Amina stood with a silver shovel in her hand and looked at the empty land that would soon become a haven for others. "I used to dream of this place in my sleep," she told the crowd, "but now I get to build it wide awake." Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, "And I get to watch you do it," Amina smiled. That night, as the sun set over the city, a small group of people stood on that open field. A girl who used to sweep floors, a billionaire who forgot how to feel, a team of workers who now believed change was possible. All because of one quiet question. "Don't you have a family too?" It was more than a question. It was a mirror. It made Edward look at himself. And in doing so, he found something better than money. He found meaning. He found connection. And he found a way back home.